Hi, my name is William and I'm 65 years old. For most of my life, I was the poor relative, the man everyone laughed at during family gatherings. They mocked my old clothes, my small apartment, and even the food I brought to the table. I was invisible, unworthy in their eyes. But years later, the tables turned. Today, those very same relatives are standing at the gates of my new mansion, begging me to let them in. Before I tell you how their mockery turned into desperation, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been judged or insulted by your own family just because you didn't have money? Let me know in the comments, and also tell me which city and country you're watching from, so I can thank you personally. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true stories like this. I wasn't born with wealth, and I never pretended otherwise. My life has been a long line of hard work, scraped knees, and quiet sacrifices. I grew up in a modest household, worked odd jobs from a young age, and later provided for my wife and son the best I could. But compared to my relatives, I was always the poor one. They built their lives in flashy ways, big houses, luxury cars, vacations abroad. They loved showing off at every family event. I, on the other hand, arrived in a second-hand suit, driving an old car that rattled if you turned too sharply. And that was enough reason for them to mock me. At birthdays, weddings, and holiday dinners, I was always the butt of the joke. "William, did you borrow that tie from a thrift store?" One cousin would laugh. "Maybe next year you can bring something better than a pie from the discount bakery," another would sneer. It wasn't just jokes, it was the way they looked at me. Pity mixed with superiority, like my very existence. Embarrassed them, I smiled through it for years. I told myself, family is family. Let them laugh, it doesn't change who I am. But deep down, every word cut. The worst part was how they excluded me. When big family decisions were made, business partnerships, property investments, vacations, I was never invited. William wouldn't be able to afford it anyway, I overheard once. No point asking him. I stayed quiet, swallowing the humiliation, telling myself my worth wasn't tied to their shallow measures of success. But it hurt. Especially because after my wife passed away, I longed for family more than ever. I wanted connection, belonging. Instead, I was treated like an outsider in my own bloodline. One Christmas, the pain became undeniable. I had saved for months to buy gifts for my nieces and nephews. Nothing fancy, just thoughtful things like books, puzzles, and small toys. But when the children unwrapped them, my relatives smirked. "Don't worry, kids," one uncle said loudly. "Your real presents are under the tree. William means well, but, you know." The room filled with laughter. I forced a smile, but inside, my heart shattered. That night, as I drove home alone in my old car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I whispered into the darkness. One day you'll see me differently. I didn't know how or when, but I made myself a silent promise. I would never let their cruelty define me. The breaking point came one summer evening at my nephew's wedding. Everyone arrived in shiny suits, luxury cars, and glittering jewelry. The reception hall was filled, with laughter, champagne, and music. I walked in wearing my best but simple dark suit. It wasn't new, but it was clean and pressed. My shoes had been polished until I could see my reflection. I carried myself with dignity, even though inside I already knew the whispers would start. And they did. At the dinner table, I sat quietly while my relatives boasted about their latest achievements. One cousin bragged about buying a vacation home in Italy. Another laughed about how cheap their $10,000 watch was compared to their friends. Then someone, half drunk on champagne, pointed at me. Well, at least William doesn't have to worry about things like that. He's been living the same life for 30 years. Simple man, simple car, simple everything. The table erupted in laughter. I forced a small smile, hoping the moment would pass. But it didn't. "Tell us, William," another uncle chimed in. "How much do you make these days? Or are you still stuck in that little apartment? Must be cozy, right?" I felt the blood rush to my face. My fork trembled in my hand. Then came the worst blow. The groom, my own nephew, raised his glass and smirked. "Don't worry, Uncle William. If you can't afford a gift, your presence is enough. We know times are tough." Laughter filled the room again. My heart sank. I had spent weeks saving to buy them a gift, something meaningful, even if not expensive. And here they were, mocking me in front of dozens of guests. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to remind them that money isn't the measure of a man. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I excused myself and slipped outside into the night air. The cool breeze hit my face, but it couldn't cool the fire burning inside me. I stood in the parking lot staring at my old car, the one they always laughed about. My reflection in the dusty window looked tired, beaten, humiliated. For a long time I just stood there wondering why family, the people who should have lifted me up, were the ones who dragged me down the hardest. I remembered all the times I had helped them, lending small amounts of money when I barely had any myself, babysitting their children for free, spending weekends fixing their broken shelves or mowing their lawns because they were too busy. And yet in their eyes I was nothing. That night I drove home in silence, the sound of the engine louder than the thoughts racing in my mind. When I reached my small apartment, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The laughter from the wedding still echoed in my ears. My hands clenched into fists. That was the moment I knew something had to change. Not because I wanted their approval, not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved better. I whispered to myself, "Enough. They will not laugh at me forever. I'll build a life so strong, so unshakable, that one day they'll regret every cruel word." And with that vow, a fire lit inside me, a fire that would carry me through years of struggle, pain, and eventually, triumph. The weeks after that wedding felt heavier than any time in my life. I would wake up in my small apartment, the walls closing in on me, and stare at the ceiling wondering what the point of it all was. I was 65, alone, and the one thing I had craved all my life, family, had turned their backs on me. Money was tight. My pension barely covered the bills. I cut corners everywhere, cheap groceries, old clothes, second-hand furniture. My fridge often looked empty with just a loaf of bread and a carton of milk to get me through. Each day was a cycle of survival, not living. But what hurt the most wasn't poverty. It was loneliness. On holidays, when others gathered around tables full of food and laughter, my phone stayed silent, no invitations, no visits, just silence. One night, sitting alone at my small kitchen table, I pulled out an old family photo album. Pictures of weddings, birthdays, summer picnics. I was always in the background, smiling, quietly supportive. Never the center, never celebrated. And yet those same people now pretended I didn't exist. Tears filled my eyes. "Maybe they're right," I whispered. "Maybe I am nothing." But just as quickly I wiped my face and shook my head. No, I refused to believe that. It was during those dark nights that I found myself walking the streets to clear my mind. One evening I passed by a pile of discarded furniture outside an upscale home. Tables, chairs, and even a dresser, all thrown out because they were scratched or broken. I stopped and ran my hand over the wood. "Still good," I murmured. "Just needs care." Something inside me stirred. The next day, I returned with a small toolkit I'd kept from my younger days. I hauled one of the broken chairs back to my apartment and spent hours sanding, fixing, polishing. By the end of the night, it looked almost new. When I showed it to a neighbor, her eyes lit up. "That's beautiful. Would you sell it?" I hesitated, then said yes. She paid me $50. It wasn't much, but it was the first time in years I felt valuable, and that tiny spark was all I needed. What started with one chair became a passion. Every week I searched neighborhoods for discarded furniture, People with wealth threw away items that only needed a little love and care, and I gave them that care. My apartment slowly filled with projects, tables stripped and refinished, chairs glued and polished, cabinets restored to life. The smell of wood and varnish filled my home, and for the first time in years I felt purpose. Soon, word spread. A friend of my neighbor asked if I could restore her dining table. Then another wanted a dresser fixed. Before long, I was getting more requests than I could handle. I started small, charging fair prices, but demand grew. I realized people were willing to pay not just for repairs, but for the beauty of restored one-of-a-kind pieces. So I invested my savings into tools, paints, and better materials. I created a small workshop in a rented garage. I named it Second Chances Furniture, and just like the furniture I was reviving, I felt like I was getting a second chance too. Months turned into years and the business grew. Local boutiques began buying my pieces to resell. Then, an interior designer discovered my work and featured it in a magazine. Suddenly, I was getting calls from high-end clients who wanted custom restorations. Money started to flow. For the first time, I didn't worry about rent or groceries. I could buy fresh clothes, eat well, even travel a little. But more than money, it was the respect that filled me with pride. Strangers admired my craftsmanship. Clients praised my dedication. I was no longer invisible. I was valued. Then came the turning point of all turning points. One afternoon, a real estate agent walked into my workshop. She had seen my work and wanted me to restore antique pieces for one of her luxury properties. While we talked, she mentioned a mansion that had just gone on the market. "William, you should see it," she said. "It has the most beautiful woodwork. Someone like you would appreciate it." Out of curiosity, I visited. The moment I walked through the grand doors, my breath caught. High ceilings, polished floors, sprawling gardens. It was everything my relatives flaunted, but 10 times more. For the first time in my life, I imagined myself not as the poor relative, but as a man who belonged in such a place. I ran my fingers along the banister, whispering, "One day," and that day came sooner than I thought. Within 2 years, Second Chances Furniture had expanded into multiple workshops. Employing younger craftsmen, I trained myself. We supplied luxury stores across the state. The business thrived beyond my wildest dreams. And when I signed the papers to buy that mansion, the same one I had only dreamed of walking through, I felt tears roll down my cheeks. Had gone from being mocked for my poverty to standing tall as the owner of something my entire family could only dream of. As I stepped into my new home, I whispered to myself, "They mocked me when I had nothing. Let's see what they do now." The day I moved into my mansion was the day I finally felt the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. I remember standing in the marble foyer, my footsteps echoing on the polished floors, and thinking, this house isn't just bricks and wood. It's proof. Proof that I am not worthless. Proof that I survived. The mansion wasn't just luxurious, it was alive with the dreams I once thought impossible. A sprawling garden where I planted roses for my late wife. A library filled with books I'd always wanted but never afforded. A workshop in the garage where I continued my craft not for money anymore but for joy. Neighbors came by, curious to meet the new owner. When they learned I had built my life from discarded furniture, their admiration was genuine. No pity, no mockery, just respect. For the first time, I felt proud to open my doors to people. I hosted dinners with friends who had supported me when I had nothing. I invited the kind neighbor who had bought my first chair, and the waitress from the diner who had given me free meals when I was struggling. These were the people who mattered, the ones who saw me as human when my own family had not. Life felt full, peaceful, worth living. But life has a funny way of circling back. Because soon, the very people who had mocked me the hardest came knocking. Started with a phone call. "William, cousin here. I heard you moved into a big place. We should come by sometime." I almost laughed. For years, these same relatives ignored my calls, left me out of gatherings, mocked me in front of others. And now suddenly they wanted to reconnect? I didn't answer. A week later, they showed up at the mansion gates. Expensive cars lined the driveway. They stepped out dressed to impress, but their smiles were nervous, almost rehearsed. "William," one aunt cried, spreading her arms as if she'd missed me all these years. "Look at you. This house is incredible. We always knew you'd make it one day." Another cousin lied through her teeth. I stayed silent, watching them squirm. Finally, one uncle cleared his throat. "Listen, William, times have been tough for us, the economy, this place, and it's too big for one man. Maybe we could move in for a while, just until things settle." My jaw tightened. For a moment I saw flashes of the past, the laughter at the wedding, the sneers at Christmas, the years of being treated like I didn't matter. And now they wanted to live under my roof? I stepped forward, my voice steady but cold. "Do you remember the wedding?" I asked. "When you laughed at me for bringing gifts that weren't expensive enough? Do you remember Christmas when you told your kids my presents were worthless? Do you remember telling me I wasn't worth inviting because I couldn't afford your vacations?" Silence. Not one of them met my eyes. I continued. "I remember. Every word, every laugh, every door you closed in my face. And now you want me to open mine to you?" One cousin stammered. We didn't mean it. We were just joking." "No," I interrupted sharply. "You meant every word. And you showed me what family meant to you. Status, money, image. Well, I have all of that now. But you will never have me." I turned and walked back to the gates. With one motion, I pressed the button that shut them out. Their voices rose, pleading, begging. But I didn't look back. For once, I was the one in control. And it felt like justice. After that day, I never heard from most of them again. A few tried to reach out with letters, apologies written in shaky hands. But I didn't respond. I had no anger left. Only clarity. Because here's the truth. Wealth doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you were all along. My relatives were cruel when I was poor and greedy when I became rich. The money didn't change them. It exposed them. And me? I realized I didn't need their approval or their love. I already had everything. I needed dignity, peace, and the respect of people who saw my worth long before I had a mansion. Now, when I sit in my grand living room, surrounded by the warmth of real friends, I smile, because the best revenge is not anger. It's not payback. It's living so well that those who mocked you are forced to watch from the outside. What about you? Have you ever been mocked or humiliated, only for life to turn the tables later? What would you do if those same people came back begging for your help? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more powerful stories of betrayal, revenge, and justice. Until next time, this is William signing off.